thank you all for the gift of your music this Easter Sunday. Lo, the day of days is here. Lo? The day of days is here. Good one, Brad. Springtime in Oregon means snail time. And for the past few weeks, my partner's grandmother, after my strident objections to her snail disposition techniques, has been collecting the snails from her garden and giving them to me in a container to release on their own recognizance at the local park. This is for their own good. I will not tell you what the previous method had been. This latest batch contained, this is just a few days ago, it contained one snail that was unusually big and strong. I said, "Look at that healthy snail." She said, "Don't tell me about it." But for whatever reason, Gran took a liking to this big snail, even though it had single-snailedly ripped through half her garden. So I kept the snail and named it Matlock. My intention was to periodically send Gran pictures of her grand snail in a calculated campaign to endear her to the rest of the snails in the garden. And this comes naturally to me because as a minister, I'm already engaged in a calculated campaign to endear humans to one another. Yeah. So back at my house, little Matlock went into a Tupperware quarantine cell for a few days before being introduced to the main terrarium, just in case Matlock had any mites or anything. And I ask you now to suspend your disbelief, because it would sound like I'm making this up, and I swear on all that is holy, and all the trust you have in me, this is true. This morning I woke up to find the lid pried back and Matlock gone. She is risen. Indeed. Which means that my partner woke up this morning to me approximately 0.5 inches away from his face, hissing, "The snail is gone." This is not an Easter Sunday joke. I also can't believe that this has happened. But as far as I know, that was a Freudian slip, snails have neither religion nor a sense of irony. They just do what they do. They just snail around God's green earth. And we need not pray for dear Matlock, because a careful snail can go months without food and water. This is true. So I'm not worried. I'm sure she's having a grand old time underneath a bookshelf or something, and will eventually turn up. Which leaves me now to tiptoe around the house. My own house, picking up every coffee mug and roll of paper towels as if it were a priceless artifact from the tomb of Jesus himself. I am not a snail, so I have a sense of what is right and good to do, and what I have to do, what care I must take. Now, you know, I don't usually rewrite a homily the morning I'm giving it. But I also woke up this morning to the news that over 200 people were killed in a series of calculated bombings of churches and hotels in Sri Lanka. It's still very early, but officials have said that it appears to be a case of religiously motivated violence on Easter Sunday. I preached recently that there are some tragedies that are so unthinkable, so horrific in their scale, that it's hard for us to find meaning or hope in them, and easier instead to succumb to despair. Because news these days is instantaneous and everywhere. We get informed about so much more human violence and tragedy than any generation before us, and it is quite literally more than any one of us can take. There's a temptation to wonder, is this humans doing what humans do? Is this just what we do on God's green earth? Our situation would then feel very hopeless. But I think back to when Jesus was executed by the state for being a radical political reformer. He was an immensely popular teacher, a dangerously popular teacher to the state, who gained a huge following by preaching that humans could treat each other better. That was his crime. And at the height of his movement, the authorities killed him, which seemingly put a stop to what he had begun. It was an attack on the church, and it left his followers in a frightened, uncertain panic. It was more than any one person could take. Whatever happened on the first Easter, when Jesus is said to have come back from the dead, whatever hope his followers found then, make no mistake that the general situation was still very bleak. The general situation was hopeless. The empire continued. Religious persecution, oppression, and corruption definitely continued. The resurrection of Jesus Christ changed very little in a perceptible way that day. And yet, in the face of this unthinkable setback, his followers held fast to their message that humans, despite what it might look like, can be good. Though it changed very little of their day-to-day world, and they were soundly ridiculed for their optimism. Is this your king? I think of this when I hear people say that political protests don't do anything. I mean, what are they supposed to do? Really, what are they supposed to do? Nobody shows up to a political protest or a peace rally thinking that after this one march, all wrongs will at last be set right. But I can understand the temptation to ridicule. Because suffering happens on such an immediate time scale, it is only ever right in front of us. It might seem that relief must be immediate and final and total, or not at all. But hope is something larger. And that's why I love Easter. The celebration of Easter has been reminding people every spring for 2,000 straight springs that not all wrongs have at last been set right, or that suffering has at last come to an end. No, it's been reminding people that in the darkest days, there is still promise. That what is good and right can never be buried for long, can never go missing for too long, but will return again and again annually. That humans are capable of great violence to one another, but also of great goodness, which will in time triumph. That after every long winter, we know there will be flowers.